The antique clock in the hallway chimed twice, its bronze pendulum catching the afternoon light as Carol Mitchell pressed herself against the bathroom door. Her heart hammered so violently she feared it might give her away. Through the thin wood, Richard's voice carried from the master bedroom, not the gentle tone he used with her, but something sharper, conspiratorial. "Mother, I told you, we need to be patient. The doctor's appointment is next week." Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Doctor's appointment? She hadn't scheduled any appointment. "Yes, I have the papers Patricia drew up," Richard continued. "Once Dr. Brennan provides his assessment about her mental state, we can move forward. The house alone is worth $3.5 million. The bathroom tiles felt ice-cold beneath Carol's stockinged feet. 25 years of marriage, and she was hearing her husband discuss her like livestock at auction. Her legs trembled as she gripped the marble countertop, her wedding ring clicking against the stone, the ring Richard had placed on her finger while promising to love and protect her. "No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's too trusting." A pause. "I know, Mother. By Thanksgiving, everything will be in place. Patricia says with the right documentation, we can have her declared incompetent within weeks." Thanksgiving. That was 5 weeks away. Carol caught her reflection in the mirror, a 56-year-old woman with carefully maintained blonde hair and tired eyes that had seen too many compromises. The same woman who'd inherited this house from her parents, who'd used her trust fund to save Richard's failing business twice, who'd welcomed his cold mother and condescending sister into their lives without complaint. "Melissa understands the timeline," Richard was saying now, and Carol's stomach lurched. Melissa, his 29-year-old secretary with the yoga-toned body and MBA from Wharton. "Once everything's finalized, we can stop pretending." The room spun. Carol lowered herself onto the closed toilet seat, her mind racing through the past months. Richard's sudden interest in her daily activities, Patricia's unexpected visits, always asking probing questions about her memory, her mood, Vivian's concerned comments to friends about her daughter-in-law's confusion. They'd been building a case. "I've been moving her things," Richard said. "Small items. She spent 20 minutes looking for her reading glasses yesterday. They were in the freezer." He chuckled, the same warm laugh that used to make her feel safe. "Next week I'll start with more important items. Her passport, maybe, or that emerald brooch from her mother." Carol's mother's brooch, the one she'd worn to her parents' funeral, the last piece of them she touched every morning when she opened her jewelry box. The beauty is, she's already been acting strange. Forgetting conversations, missing appointments. Depression from empty nest syndrome, I tell people. His voice carried a satisfaction that made bile rise in her throat. "Dr. Brennan is very sympathetic. Vivian, you're brilliant for finding him." Through the door, she heard him walking, toward the bathroom. Carol's pulse exploded into panic. She couldn't be found here, couldn't let him know she'd heard. With shaking hands, she turned on the faucet, splashed water on her face. The doorknob turned. "Carol?" Richard's face appeared, concern painted across his features with an artist's precision. "Honey, are you all right?" "You look pale." She forced her lips into the submissive smile he expected. "Just a little headache. You know how the weather changes affect me." His eyes studied her, and for a moment she saw calculation behind the familiar brown irises. Then he smiled, crossing to rub her shoulders with practiced tenderness. "Poor thing. Why don't you lie down? I'll bring you some tea." "That would be nice," she managed, her voice steady despite the revolution in her chest. He kissed her forehead, Judas in a Brooks Brothers suit, and left. Carol remained frozen until she heard his footsteps descending the stairs. Then she locked the door and pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. The screen showed 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize over the past month. Now she understood why. She scrolled through her recent texts. 3 appointments she didn't remember making. 2 messages to friends she didn't recall sending, both saying she felt confused lately and not herself. They'd been in her phone. A message popped up from Patricia. Looking forward to lunch tomorrow. We need to discuss your future care arrangements. Richard's worried about you. Carol stared at the words, her mind shifting from shock to something colder, sharper. They thought she was weak. They thought she was stupid. They thought 25 years of devotion had made her blind. They were wrong. She opened her banking app, fingers flying across the screen. The joint account showed normal activity, but when she checked her inheritance account, the one only she had access to, there were 3 recent login attempts. All failed, all from IP addresses she didn't recognize. They'd been trying to get in. Another text, this time from Vivian. Dearest Carol, I've scheduled you an appointment with a wonderful therapist. Dr. Brennan comes highly recommended for women your age dealing with difficulties. Women your age. Difficulties. Carol walked to the bedroom window, looking out at the manicured lawn of the house her parents had loved, the garden where her mother had planted roses that still bloomed every spring. Richard was down there now, on his phone again, pacing by the pool. Even from here she could see his smile, the real one, not the mask he wore for her. She thought about the last few months with new eyes, the lost car keys that appeared in places she'd never leave them. The forgotten conversations about commitments she knew she'd never made. The gentle gaslighting she'd attributed to her own stress, maybe early menopause, anything but deliberate cruelty from the man who shared her bed. Her phone buzzed. Joyce, her oldest friend, the one person who'd never liked Richard. Haven't heard from you in weeks. That's not like you. Coffee tomorrow? Carol started to type, yes, then stopped. Tomorrow she was supposed to have lunch with Patricia, the lunch where they'd discuss her care arrangements. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as a plan began to form. She wasn't just going to survive this, she was going to win. She typed back to Joyce, actually, could you meet me tonight? Somewhere private. I need your help with something. The response was immediate. Of course. My apartment. 8 p.m. Are you okay? Carol looked at Richard, still on his phone in the garden, probably talking to Melissa, planning their future with her money, in her house, on the grave of her trust. I will be, she typed. She had 5 weeks until Thanksgiving, 5 weeks to gather evidence, protect her assets, and destroy the people who thought they could destroy her. They'd made one crucial mistake in their perfect plan. They'd given her time to fight back. Walking to her closet, Carol pushed aside the designer dresses Richard liked her to wear and pulled out a small lockbox hidden behind her shoes. Inside was her passport, her mother's jewelry, and something else, a business card she'd kept for reasons she couldn't explain. Frank Russo, private investigator, retired, a man her father had trusted with delicate matters, who'd attended the funeral and quietly told her to call if she ever needed anything. She needed everything. The clock chimed 3. Richard would expect her to be napping, recovering from her headache. Instead, she sat at her vanity and began to write, documenting everything she'd heard, everything she'd noticed, everything they'd done. Her handwriting was steady now, the trembling gone, replaced by something harder. Patricia texted again. Mom says you've been forgetful lately. We're all concerned. Family takes care of family, right? Carol smiled, a real smile, sharp as winter. Family takes care of family. They had no idea how right they were. She picked up the business card and dialed. 3 rings, then a gravelly voice, Russo. Mr. Russo, this is Carol Mitchell, Harrison's daughter. A pause. Carol, been a long time. You in trouble? She watched Richard end his call and head back toward the house, his step light with the confidence of a man whose plan was working perfectly. Yes, she said quietly, but they're in more trouble. They just don't know it yet. When do you want to meet? Tonight, after I see a friend. Can you come to the city? I'll be wherever you need me. Richard's footsteps sounded on the stairs. Carol quickly hid the papers, closed the lockbox, and lay down on the bed, pulling a throw blanket over herself. She heard him pause outside the door, listening, checking on his victim. The door opened softly. Carol? You awake, honey? She kept her breathing deep and even, a skill learned from 25 years of pretending to be asleep when he came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He stood there for a moment, watching, then quietly closed the door. Only when she heard him return downstairs did Carol open her eyes. They burned with tears she wouldn't shed, not for him, not for any of them. The tears were for the woman she'd been, the one who'd loved without question, trusted without doubt. That woman had died the moment she heard Richard planning her destruction with his mother. The woman who remained was someone different, someone dangerous. The clock chimed 4. 3 hours until she could escape to Joyce's, 3 hours to play the devoted, confused wife one last time. She could do that. She'd been playing roles for them her entire marriage, but this time she was writing the script. Her phone lit up with another message, this one from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, then noticed the preview. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Melissa Turner. Richard asked me to remind you about your doctor's appointment next week. He's very concerned about your well-being." Carol screenshot the message, adding it to her growing collection of evidence. They were so confident, so careless, leaving digital breadcrumbs that would lead to their own destruction. Outside, the October sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and promises. Somewhere in the house below, Richard was probably pouring himself a scotch, congratulating himself on his cleverness. Tomorrow, Patricia would probe for signs of confusion over lunch. Next week, Dr. Brennan would find exactly what they'd paid him to find. They had their timeline. But Carol had something better, the element of surprise, the fury of a woman betrayed, and 25 years of knowing exactly how they thought, what they feared, and where they were vulnerable. The clock kept ticking, counting down to Thanksgiving. It would be a feast they'd never forget. 1 week had passed since Carol's world shattered in that bathroom. 7 days of performing the role of the deteriorating wife while building her arsenal of evidence. The lunch with Patricia had been a masterclass in deception, on both sides. Now, sitting in her car outside Vivian's house on a drizzly Thursday morning, Carol adjusted the tiny recording device Frank Russo had given her, hidden beneath the silk scarf at her throat. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she watched Richard's Mercedes already parked in his mother's driveway. The weekly business meeting he'd told her about, except Richard had retired from active business 2 years ago. She checked her phone. The new bank account she'd opened in her maiden name at a credit union across town showed the first transfer from her inheritance fund. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger alerts. Frank had been clear. Move it slowly. Too fast and they'll know you're on to them. The front door of Vivian's house opened. Carol slumped down, though her car was parked half a block away behind a delivery truck. Patricia emerged, her Burberry trench coat perfect despite the rain, followed by someone Carol didn't expect, Dr. Martin Brennan himself. The psychiatrist who was supposed to evaluate her next week looked younger than his photos online, maybe 45, with the kind of concerned expression that probably fooled desperate families into trusting him. Carol raised her phone, filming through the rain-spotted window as Patricia handed Brennan an envelope. Even from this distance, she could see it was thick. Cash, most likely. Nothing traceable. They spoke for several minutes, Brennan nodding, occasionally glancing around nervously. Then, he got into his Lexus and drove away. Patricia remained on the porch, pulling out her phone. Carol's own phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Just checking in, sister-in-law. Richard mentioned you seemed confused about our lunch last week. You insisted on the seafood restaurant, remember, even though you're allergic?" Carol stared at the message. She'd never been allergic to seafood. They were creating a medical history, a pattern of dangerous confusion. She screenshot it and typed back, "You're right, silly me." Getting older, I guess. Let them think she was playing along. Patricia disappeared back into the house. Carol waited another 10 minutes, then drove to her next appointment, one they didn't know about. The law offices of Hartley and Associates occupied a gleaming tower downtown, far from Richard's usual haunts. Joyce had recommended them. Her cousin Susan Hartley specialized in protecting women's assets during contentious divorces. "They're trying to have you declared incompetent?" Susan Hartley was 62, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every dirty trick in the book. She reviewed the documents Carol had gathered, her expression darkening with each page. That's their plan. But there's more. Carol pulled out a folder Frank had compiled. 15 years ago, Richard's father died suddenly. Heart attack, everyone said. But look at this. Susan studied the medical records Frank had somehow obtained. The symptoms, they're consistent with digoxin poisoning. Foxglove, Carol said quietly. Vivian grew it in her garden. Still does. After Thomas died, she inherited everything. His first wife's family tried to contest it, said she'd manipulated him in his final months. Sound familiar? Jesus Christ. Susan leaned back. They've done this before. Frank thinks we can prove it. The pattern is identical. Isolation, gaslighting, sudden illness. Thomas's medical records show he was being treated for confusion and memory issues in his final months. We need to get you somewhere safe, Susan said. If they're capable of this... No. Carol's voice was steel. I'm not running. Besides, they need me functional until they get the papers signed. I'm safe until then. What about after? Carol thought of the foxglove in Vivian's garden. I'll be careful. Her phone rang. Richard. I should take this, Carol said. Susan nodded, turning on her recorder. Hi, honey, Carol answered, her voice deliberately weak. Carol, where are you? You missed your hair appointment. She hadn't had a hair appointment. Oh, did I? I'm so sorry. I'm just driving around. I felt like I needed air. Driving around? His voice sharpened with false concern. Honey, that's not safe in your condition. Where are you exactly? I'm not sure. The streets all look the same today. She heard him cover the phone, muffled voices in the background. Vivian, probably. Maybe Patricia. Stay where you are, Richard said. I'll come get you. Can you see any street signs? I think I'll just come home, Carol said. I remember the way home. Are you sure? Maybe you should... I'm fine, Richard. I'll see you soon. She hung up before he could protest. Susan was already typing. I'm filing a protective order. Quietly. It won't be activated unless something happens to you, but it'll be on record. Carol nodded, then stood. I have one more stop today. The Marriott downtown was the kind of place where affairs happened in broad daylight, anonymous and discreet. Carol had hired a professional photographer through Frank, someone who specialized in divorce cases. The photos he'd taken over the past week were spread across the hotel room's desk. Richard and Melissa at lunch, her hand on his. Richard entering her apartment building at midnight, the two of them looking at real estate listings on his phone, heads close together, planning their future with Carol's money. Got something new today, the photographer Marcus said. He pulled up images on his laptop. Followed the girl, Melissa. She went to a fertility clinic. Carol's blood chilled. What? She's pregnant. About 6 weeks based on the appointment schedule I saw. The room tilted. Carol gripped the desk. Richard had gotten his secretary pregnant while planning to steal everything Carol owned. You okay? Marcus asked. Yes, Carol managed. This is actually perfect. It was, because Richard didn't know Carol knew, and that pregnancy would destroy him, socially, financially, professionally, if it came out at the right moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Dearest, Richard says you're having an episode. I'm scheduling an emergency appointment with Dr. Brennan for tomorrow. Tomorrow. They were accelerating the timeline. Carol looked at Marcus. I need you at this address tomorrow at 2 p.m. She wrote down Brennan's office address. Bring a long-range lens. She drove home carefully, noting the black sedan that followed her from downtown. Frank had warned her they might hire someone to watch her. Let them watch. Let them see a confused, vulnerable woman coming apart at the seams. Richard was waiting in the kitchen, concern painted across his face like stage makeup. Carol, honey, you had me so worried. I'm sorry, she whispered, adding a tremor to her voice. I don't know what came over me. I just felt so lost suddenly. He pulled her into his arms, and it took everything she had not to recoil. He smelled of Melissa's perfume, jasmine and betrayal. "Mom thinks you should see Dr. Brennan tomorrow," he said into her hair. "Just to talk. Would that be okay?" "If you think it's best," she murmured against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, calm, the pulse of a man without conscience. "I do. We all just want what's best for you." That night, Richard made her favorite dinner. Salmon with dill sauce, asparagus, the good wine from their anniversary trip to Napa. He was attentive, loving, the perfect husband. Carol played her part, accidentally calling him by the wrong name once, pretending not to notice the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. After dinner, he suggested she take her medication, sleeping pills he'd gotten from somewhere, not her usual prescription. She palmed them, pretending to swallow, then excused herself to the bathroom where she spit them into tissue. When she returned, Richard was on the phone in his study, door cracked. She lingered in the hallway, silent. "Tomorrow afternoon, Brennan will declare her unfit. Patricia has the conservatorship papers ready." A pause. "Yes, Mother, I know. The house transfers to me as next of kin once she's declared incompetent. We can sell it by spring." Spring. They plan to have her locked away by spring. "What about the offshore accounts?" Vivian's voice, on speaker. "I've got a guy who can hack them once we have conservatorship. She'll never even know they're gone." Carol slipped upstairs to the guest room she'd been sleeping in, claiming Richard's snoring kept her awake. She locked the door and called Frank. "They're moving tomorrow," she whispered. "Then we move tonight. Check your email." She opened her laptop. Frank had sent a treasure trove, financial records showing Richard's debts, much worse than she'd imagined. He owed $300,000 to some very unfriendly people. Patricia had been sued twice for malpractice, settled quietly both times, and Vivian. "Oh my God," Carol breathed. "Yeah," Frank said. "She's done this twice before. First husband in 1987, then Thomas. Both times inherited everything. Both times the families suspected foul play but couldn't prove it. She's a black widow. Runs in the family, apparently. Your boy Richard had a fiancée before you. Rebecca Marsh. Died in a car accident 3 weeks before the wedding. Guess who benefited from her life insurance?" Carol's hands shook. "He killed her?" "Can't prove it, but the brake lines were suspicious. Case went cold. She'd been sleeping next to a murderer for 25 years. What do I do? Survive tomorrow, get Brennan on tape, then we blow it all up at Thanksgiving. Public humiliation, criminal charges, the works. But Carol, after tomorrow it gets dangerous. They'll know you know." "I understand. I've got guys who can watch you." "Say the word." "After tomorrow, I don't want to spook them now." She hung up and opened the lockbox where she kept her mother's jewelry. At the bottom, wrapped in velvet, was an old voice recorder her father had used for business. Still worked. She'd wear it tomorrow, backup for the device Frank had given her. A soft knock at the door. "Carol? You okay in there?" Richard, testing if she'd locked the door. She had. "Just getting ready for bed," she called. "Don't forget your medication, honey." "Already took it." His footsteps retreated. Carol waited an hour, then crept to the window. The black sedan was still there, parked across the street. But now there was another car, Frank's man, watching the watchers. She returned to bed but didn't sleep. Tomorrow, she'd walk into the lion's den. Brennan would ask his questions, make his assessments, declare her unfit. She'd let him. She'd play the part perfectly, the confused, declining woman they'd created. But while they celebrated their victory, she'd be ready with her own surprise. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the preview. "This is Melissa. We need to talk. About Richard. About everything." Carol stared at the message. Was this a trap? Another manipulation? She typed back, "Tomorrow night. After my appointment. You know where to find me." The response was immediate. "I know what they're planning. All of it. I want out." Carol smiled in the darkness. Every betrayal had its own betrayal nested inside, like Russian dolls of deception. Richard had betrayed her, but apparently he was betraying Melissa too. Tomorrow would be interesting. She thought of Vivian's foxglove garden, purple bells nodding in the rain. Beautiful, deadly, just like the family she'd married into. But they'd forgotten something important about Carol Harrison Mitchell. Her maiden name was Harrison, as in Harrison Industries, the company her grandfather built from nothing. She came from fighters, too, and tomorrow the fight would truly begin. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the house, Richard was probably reviewing the plan with his mother, confident in their victory. Let them plan. Let them scheme. Carol touched the recorder in her jewelry box, checked the battery on the device at her throat, and smiled. By Thanksgiving, the hunters would become the hunted. The clock on the nightstand ticked toward midnight. Tomorrow, Dr. Brennan would declare her incompetent at 2 p.m. She could hardly wait. Thanksgiving arrived dressed in frost and deception. Carol Mitchell stood in her kitchen at dawn, stuffing a 22-pound turkey with the same steady hands that had signed her own commitment papers 3 weeks earlier. The psychiatric hold had lasted 72 hours, just long enough for Richard to get temporary conservatorship, but not long enough to break her. She'd played her part perfectly during Dr. Brennan's evaluation, letting tears fall as she confessed to confusion, fear, memory lapses. The recording device had caught everything, including Brennan's whispered consultation with Richard in the hallway. "She's clearly deteriorating. I'll recommend immediate intervention." What they didn't know was that Susan Hartley had filed an injunction the moment Carol was committed, freezing all asset transfers, or that Frank Russo had been documenting their every move, or that Melissa Turner, 6 weeks pregnant and abandoned by Richard the moment the conservatorship was signed, had provided Carol with everything: emails, recordings, videos that would destroy them all. The kitchen door opened. Vivian entered, carrying her famous foxglove honey, made from the purple flowers in her garden, the same honey she'd served to both her husbands before they died. "Carol, dear, you're up early." Vivian's voice dripped false concern. "Should you be handling knives in your condition?" Carol smiled, continuing to work. "I feel wonderful today, Vivian." Clear-headed for the first time in weeks. Something flickered in the older woman's eyes. "That's good. The medication must be helping." "Oh, I stopped taking it." Carol turned, holding the carving knife, watching Vivian step back. "It made me feel so fuzzy. Richard doesn't know. Please don't tell him. I want today to be perfect." Vivian's face went through several calculations before settling on a grandmother's indulgent smile. "Of course, dear. Our secret." She set the honey on the counter. "For the biscuits." "Family tradition." Carol picked up the jar, examined it. "How thoughtful. Though I made my mother's recipe instead, the ones with regular honey. I hope you don't mind." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Not at all." By noon, the house filled with arrivals. Patricia came first, wearing her lawyer face and a Hermes scarf that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Then Richard's cousin Mark and his wife, witnesses, Carol knew, to whatever they planned for today. Finally, Richard emerged from his study, where he'd been on the phone with investors about a significant property that would soon be available. Her house. He was already selling her house. "How are you feeling, honey?" Richard kissed her cheek, his lips cold. "Perfect," Carol said, and meant it. The dining room looked magnificent. Carol had used her grandmother's china, the Waterford crystal, everything that screamed old money and tradition. The turkey gleamed golden, surrounded by dishes that had taken her 3 days to prepare. No one could say she'd lost her competence. "Before we eat," Carol announced, "I have something special." She'd connected her laptop to the television Richard had installed last year, the 70-inch screen perfect for what came next. "I've been working on a family video, a celebration of our 25 years together." Richard and Vivian exchanged glances. Patricia's hand moved toward her phone, probably ready to call Dr. Brennan. The screen lit up with their wedding photo. Young Carol, radiant in white. Richard, handsome and seemingly devoted. Then the music faded, replaced by Richard's voice. "Mother, I told you, we need to be patient. The doctor's appointment is next week." Vivian's face drained of color. The recording continued. Every conversation, every plot, every confession. Richard discussing Carol's money, Patricia explaining how to forge medical documents, Vivian advising on the proper dosage of medications to keep Carol compliant. Then the video footage began. Patricia handing cash to Dr. Brennan, Richard entering Melissa's apartment. The three of them, Richard, Vivian, and Patricia, toasting with champagne the night Carol was committed. "To the success of our plan," Vivian had said, raising her glass. The room was silent except for the damning audio. Mark and his wife sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. "There's more," Carol said pleasantly. She clicked to the next file, Melissa's folder. Richard's face went gray as intimate photos filled the screen, messages about their future. The ultrasound image dated 6 weeks ago, Melissa's recorded confession about the entire plot, provided in exchange for Carol not pressing charges against her. "You got her pregnant while planning to steal everything I inherited from my parents." Carol's voice was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "But here's the interesting part." She clicked again. Financial records appeared. "You're $300,000 in debt to some very unpleasant people, Richard. You've been stealing from your mother, too. $50,000 from her accounts over 2 years. Patricia, you've been disbarred in 2 states and practicing here illegally. And Vivian." She turned to her mother-in-law. "Thomas wasn't your first, was he? Your first husband, Harold, died the same way, foxglove poisoning, though they called it heart failure in 1987. His family knew but couldn't prove it. But now, with Thomas's exhumed remains showing the same traces and Harold's family ready to testify, well..." Vivian stood shaking. "You can't prove anything." "I don't have to." Carol pulled out her phone, showed the screen. "You're live on Facebook, Vivian. Has been for the last 10 minutes. 47,000 viewers and climbing. The comments are unsympathetic." Patricia lunged for Carol's phone. Carol stepped back, and Frank Russo entered from the kitchen, followed by 2 police officers and a woman in an FBI windbreaker. "Richard Mitchell, Patricia Mitchell Brown, Vivian Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and false imprisonment." The FBI agent's voice was steady. "Dr. Martin Brennan is already in custody and has been very cooperative." As they were handcuffed, Carol noticed the Thanksgiving turkey growing cold on its platter. Such a waste of good food. "The house in the Hamptons," Richard said desperately as they led him past. "Rebecca's insurance money bought it. It's in an offshore account. I'll give you everything if you—" "Rebecca Marsh's family already knows," Carol interrupted. "They're reopening the case." Amazing what modern forensics can find. Vivian collapsed then, the weight of 3 murders finally breaking her. "It was for the family," she whispered. "Everything was for the family." "No," Carol said. "It was for control. For money. For power over people who trusted you." As the police cars pulled away, Mark and his wife still sat at the table stunned. The live stream had ended, but Carol's phone buzzed with hundreds of messages. Joyce, Susan Hartley, friends she hadn't heard from in years, even Melissa saying simply, "Thank you for keeping your word." Carol walked through her empty house, truly hers now, no longer tainted by their presence. In the kitchen, she saw Vivian's jar of foxglove honey still on the counter. She picked it up carefully, thinking of Thomas, of Harold, of how close she'd come to being the 3rd victim. Through the window, she could see Vivian's house, dark now, probably forever. The foxgloves in the garden nodded in the wind, purple bells tolling silently for the family that had destroyed itself with greed. Her phone rang. Frank Russo. "You did good, kid. Your father would be proud. What happens now?" "Richard's looking at 20 years minimum. Patricia will be disbarred nationally, probably 5 to 10 years prison. Vivian, she'll die in prison." Carol felt nothing, not satisfaction, not sorrow, just empty space where love used to live. "There's one more thing," Frank said. "We tracked down more of Richard's debts. The people he owes, they'll be coming for the assets." "Let them come," Carol said. "Everything's in trust now, protected. They can't touch it." She hung up and returned to the dining room. The feast lay abandoned, 22 pounds of perfectly cooked betrayal. She picked up her grandmother's wine glass, still full of the good Bordeaux, and raised it to the empty chairs. "To family," she said to the silence, "and to knowing when to let go." Outside, snow began to fall, covering the tracks of the police cars, the path to Vivian's door, the foxgloves in their winter sleep. By morning, everything would be clean and white and new. Carol thought about the psychiatric hospital, those 72 hours when they'd thought they'd won. She'd spent them planning, preparing, protected by Susan Hartley's legal maneuvers and Frank's investigation. The hardest part had been pretending to break when she was actually becoming stronger than ever. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda Williams, her son from her first marriage, the one she'd had at 19, who Richard never knew existed, the one she'd given up for adoption to protect him from her parents' disapproval, who'd found her 3 years ago but agreed to stay secret. Saw the news. "Are you okay, Mom?" For the first time in weeks, Carol smiled genuinely. "I'm free," she typed back. "Thanksgiving next year at my house? You can finally meet everyone who matters." "I'll bring my family." Family. Real family. Not the poisonous simulacrum she'd survived for 25 years, but something genuine. She walked to Richard's study, former study, and found his files on Rebecca Marsh. Photos of a young woman who looked a bit like Carol had at that age. Trusting eyes, generous smile, dead at 28, 3 weeks before marrying Richard. "I'm sorry," Carol whispered to the photo. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." But she had seen it in time to save herself, and to get justice for Rebecca, for Thomas, for Harold, for all Vivian's victims stretching back decades. The doorbell rang. Joyce stood on the porch, holding a bottle of champagne and a pumpkin pie. "Thought you might need company." Carol let her in, and they sat in the kitchen, away from the ruined feast, eating pie and drinking champagne from coffee mugs, while Joyce shared stories from the livestream comments. Apparently, 3 of Richard's former mistresses had recognized him and were sharing their own stories. Patricia's ex-husband was considering suing for custody of their children, and Vivian's garden club had already expelled her posthumously. If there was one thing they couldn't forgive, it was using foxgloves for murder. Bad for the club's image. "What will you do now?" Joyce asked. Carol thought about it. The house was hers, free and clear. The inheritance was protected. The monsters who'd tried to destroy her were facing justice. "I think," she said slowly, "I'll start by redecorating." Richard always hated color. They laughed, and it echoed through the empty rooms, chasing out the ghosts of false love and real betrayal. As midnight approached, Carol stood in Vivian's abandoned garden with a can of gasoline. The foxgloves would bloom again in spring if left alone, purple bells full of digitalis, beautiful and deadly. She poured the gasoline carefully, thoroughly, then dropped a lit match. The garden burned through the night, visible from Carol's bedroom window, a funeral pyre for the family that never really was, a cleansing fire for the woman she was becoming. By morning, only ashes remained where the foxgloves had grown. Carol had the earth salted and covered with concrete within the week. Nothing would grow there again. Some gardens, she'd learned, were better off destroyed, but in her own yard she planted roses, her mother's favorite variety, pink and harmless and true. They bloomed every spring for years after. Long after the trials ended, the appeals failed, and the Mitchell name became synonymous with a particular kind of evil. Carol legally returned to Harrison, rebuilt her life, reconnected with the son she'd hidden, and learned to trust again. Carefully, slowly, with the wisdom of someone who'd survived the worst betrayal possible. The last news she heard of Richard came 5 years later, dead in prison, killed by another inmate over a debt. Patricia died by suicide in her cell after 2 years. Vivian, diagnosed with dementia, spent her final days confessing to murders no one could prove anymore, dying alone and unmourned. Carol outlived them all, surrounded by real family, genuine friends, and the roses that bloomed where poison never grew.